Good evening, good morning, good night. I'm not really sure exactly what time it is. I think it's like 11:25 here on the West Coast, December 22nd. 1 year since Oren and Orson went missing. Well, reported missing, and yeah, been a long time. Sometimes I get just this little urge to stream. I'm not really sure. I'm not really sure why. Sometimes I just like, let's, I'm in the middle of working on something. So start working on it. And then, you know what? There's something I want to do. There's something I want to talk about. There's something I want to show you. There's something this, blah, 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 blah. Hey, what's going on? I'm surprised anybody's here. I mean, it really is surprising. Arkansas, what's up? Thank you for your PayPal I received. Thank you for that. How is everybody doing tonight? It's nice. Where's my foam cover? That's like my biggest concern in the world right now. I guess if that's the biggest concern I have, I'm not doing too bad. Welcome to the lab. I'm your host, Joshua Diaz. The lab after dark. It is definitely dark. It is dark. And I had been working on a few things, and there were some cases in the past that I've covered that are, I guess, old and like the Amanda Knox. I'm not sure who's familiar with the Amanda Knox saga, and I don't know how people feel about Amanda Knox. I'm sure there's some people that think she's guilty. Some people think she's innocent. Some people think that she's somewhere in the middle, not really sure. But, you know, like every case, she has her diehards. Like every case, she has her diehards. Like every case, she has people that support her all the way. Then you have people that go, well, some things just don't seem right. And in my personal opinion, anything, if you can see anything in the Amanda Knox case, you can tell not everything makes sense. There's just something about Amanda, and she's been on this streak, this tour, you know, because she writes books post incident and things like that. And Amanda's kind of on this promotional tour and things. And I heard her on Rogan the other day. I think it was on Rogan, and it just seems like to me that she lies a lot. And that does that mean that she's a murderer? Not necessarily, no. But she doesn't tell the whole truth about everything that happened. Like, I personally, in my personal opinion, believe that Amanda had something to do with the murder of Meredith Kircher, but I can't tell you for certain that she did. I have a feeling. I have a suspicion. And in those instances, I think, you know, who knows? But she's not telling the whole truth, and she usually doesn't. And I mean, that's just kind of how she is. That's how she's been. She's an interesting character, to say the least. I mean, she's polarizing, and I don't know if people truly like believe that she's not completely innocent. Like, oh my God, there's so many things about her that you take for granted or that you don't know about. She is strange. Let me see here. I respectfully disagree, Josh. Respectfully disagree about what? The crazy thing about that is that they can still retry her case, no double jeopardy, which is her case. I think she's guilty, anyways. I am, yeah. Yeah, I mean, she does. I agree. She gives off shady vibes. She's off. Well, look, I agree. You can, but you can think that. You can think that. You may not be wrong. You may be wrong. There's a lot. There's a lot that we don't really know about it. But I did a podcast with possibly one of the most brilliant minds when it comes to these kind of cases that I've ever dealt with, and he is the best. And his name is Gary Meese. We're talking about Amanda Knox. Amanda Knox, guys, come on now. Amanda Knox. That's what we're talking about. We're talking about Amanda Knox. And so just joined. I hate your friend. What does that mean? Who are you talking about? Podcast. Excellent, Josh. Thank you. And I'm gonna revisit one tonight because he's the best ever. But keep an open mind, and let's take a listen because it is interesting. And this is an episode that I did a little while back. Welcome to the No Big Deal podcast. I'm your host, Joshua Diaz, and today I am joined by my favorite guest and friend of mine, Gary Meese. Gary is the author of 3 books about the West Memphis 3, Blood on Black, Where the Monsters Go, and The Case Against the West Memphis 3, all on Amazon for purchase. They are fantastic books. I reference them all the time when talking about the West Memphis 3. How you doing today, Gary?
I'm good.
Good. And today we're not talking about the West Memphis 3, surprisingly. We're talking about another internationally known case that has captivated people for years, also along the genre of I guess you would call it the or as they would like to call it, the falsely accused. But this is the case of Amanda Knox, and it falls right in line with that kind of West Memphis 3 blueprint, wouldn't you say?
In a lot of ways, yes. Yeah.
Yeah,
Obviously,
and
the
so
case is very different in many respects. Yes.
and so basically, it all just kind of starts off with this young girl. She was 19 at the time, Amanda.
She was 20.
She was 20 at the time. Okay. And one of the funny things is people think that she was a part of some student exchange program. And that's not really true, is it either?
She was enrolled in this very undemanding course of study in Perugia, Italy. Basically, she took a variety of courses, but it was mostly language courses. It was not demanding. It was not really even much of an academic environment. As she said so herself. I mean, she had enormous amounts of free time. So
yeah, and So one of the things that she enjoyed to do, and even according to most, people that knew her, was that not unlike a lot of 20-year-olds, but she did enjoy to party, and that was um kind of what this whole thing was about, was, kind of traveling abroad, um kind of you're coming out as a an adult type thing. And Amanda, who at the time was from Seattle. She ends up in Italy, in this little cottage with a girl that lived there named Meredith Kircher. And something, can you talk about the relationship between Meredith and Amanda?
Yeah, they were. Meredith was a British girl. She was involved in a really rigorous course of study, that was part of these academies that had been set up back by Mussolini of all people, but back that far back, where he'd been trying to encourage more international students at Italian colleges and so forth. And so, she was a very serious student and had gone there for an academic year. And they both had come upon there are a lot of foreign students there. It's a town of about 160,000 people, Perugia, and about 1/4 of them, 40,000 of those, are students. So it's got a reputation as being a party town, which it would be even under that number of students as part of the population. There's going to be a lot of partying going on, but the atmosphere there was very lenient concerning the partying that went on. Drug use was rampant, and with all the other stuff that goes on, it's not known for uh, high incidence of violent crime. I'm sure there's quite a bit of lower level crime going on. A lot of drug dealing for certain, but police didn't seem to be terribly interested in that. But they had both rented a room in this house that was really on the edge and sort of away from everything else. Below this roadway, there were two. It was a two-story place. There were four male Italian students below on the first floor. Second floor, there were four women living there. Two women, a little bit older, in their late 20s, who worked at a law firm together, and then Meredith Kircher and Amanda Knox. Amanda got there about 6 weeks before, and I think Meredith came in a few weeks later. So they hadn't known each other very long, maybe a month or so, basically.
Yeah, and there was some things that I had heard about. There's this really informative website called, I believe it's called the murder of meredithkircher.com. And it's got, it's got a lot of the things that you won't um, find on a YouTube video. And some of what I read was that part of their initial run-ins were that Amanda was kind of a slob, that she was a little messy, and Meredith didn't appreciate it so much. And you know, now obviously that's not a motive for murder. I'm not insinuating that it is, but I am insinuating that it doesn't seem like they got along as well as you might think that Amanda, or as well as Amanda might lead you to believe. Is that accurate?
I think that's fair, and I think one of the ironies in the Amanda story is that her idea of going to Italy, that she was going to immerse herself in this Italian culture and so forth, and a lot of the problems that came for her really all along, including her initial living arrangement, but it continued into her trial. Was while she claimed she made this pitch that she wanted to be, immerse herself in Italian culture. She brought a very American sensibility into this, and even by American standards, she was loud. She was, she sounds pretty obnoxious and insensitive and even downright rude.
Spoiled.
And then spoiled. She wasn't from a wealthy family, but her parents had indulged her quite a bit.
Oh, they cherished her.
They cherished her. She had been a bit of a, she'd been a bit of a star in the family, in the sense that she was a good student. She was a talented athlete. She was smart. She was attractive, and so she seemed to have a lot going for her. But she had this rather off-putting personality that even her friends sort of make excuses for and say, she prided herself on being quirky and weird. Well, part of the problem with being quirky and weird is some people don't want to be around quirky, weird people. And it appears that Meredith, pretty early on, after she had attached herself to a group of British girls, they were all friends, and then Amanda shows up, and she absolutely does not fit in with the British girls at all. They're much more laid back and quiet and polite, even though you really overstate how, it's not as if they weren't out partying too, because they were. But Amanda cranked it up to a whole another level, and that created a lot of the tensions between Meredith and Amanda, apparently. There's some irony here in that Amanda's habit of not flushing the toilet after she uses it, particularly after number 2.
Which is grotesque, by the way.
It is grotesque. There were 2 bathrooms in the place. They shared the smaller bathroom, and Meredith thought this was disgusting, which, it actually is.
Yeah, it pissed me off.
And because I don't want to see. Do you want to see that? I sure don't.
Hell,
anyway,
no, flush the toilet. It's not that hard.
Yeah, but this created a problem, and then an unflushed toilet actually shows up as a significant part of the crime scene.
Oh yeah.
And except then Amanda was really so upset about it that she went running to her boyfriend about it. So, or so she says.
Yeah.
So as long as it's this, and this says something about Amanda, her unflushed toilet is not a problem. Your unflushed toilet is a big problem.
Right. It's kind of the I can do whatever, and if you do it, it's a whole problem.
And that same sort of attitude, her parents, I know we're getting ahead of ourselves, but when the trial comes around, her parents show up, and her parents were divorced. Her parents show up from Seattle, and her mother in particular spent a lot of time there. Well, they were adamant that they were just going to be good old Americans in this Italian town, and it didn't go over well from a public relations standpoint with the Italian public. Surprise, surprise. So, there's a lesson to be learned from this, but I don't know that any of them ever actually learned it.
No, and then it's one of those things where Americans can be kind of considered, especially abroad, loud and arrogant and fat, and all that stuff.
Yeah,
and
ugly American, the old ugly American.
Yeah, and sometimes people, sometimes like people like Amanda Knox and her folks, that rings true, and it certainly, like you said, it certainly did in this case. And so you have, let's just go to November 1st when Meredith was hanging out with those girls that you were speaking of. They were hanging out around 4 o'clock, and Meredith had spent the evening with those English friends. I believe it was Robin, Amy, and Sophie were their names, and they were making pizza, and they were hanging out looking at these Halloween photos and stuff like that.
And they watched The Notebook.
It's a good movie. It's a good movie.
Yeah, they Halloween had been the night before,
Right.
and that was not really, speaking of something that was sort of imposed on the Italian culture. That was not really something that the Italians did, was have this big Halloween celebration. So, but there was a sizable foreign contingent living in town, so Halloween was an excuse for people to dress up, go out, party, etc.,
Yeah.
etc. Not that they really needed an excuse,
Yeah.
but they did. And Amanda famously was out partying really till I think 6:30 in the morning. Not Amanda, but Meredith was until 6:30 in the morning Halloween night. So they were kind of winding down the next day, and she and one of her friends eventually left the friend's apartment. I believe Sophie walked with her a good deal of the way home, and then Meredith goes on home. And then we get to the question of what happened. And
Yeah, well, so basically on that November when she, had went home and said that she was tired,
yeah,
that was the last time that she was ever seen alive. And that's where the gaps really, you got to really start filling in what had happened, because Amanda and we how about we first let's talk about let's talk about Raphael Solecito uh and meeting Amanda. So how did that come about? Where do you know where they met at?
well, Meredith and Amanda had gone to a classical music concert uh, a week before, so they were hanging out together some. Let's not give a totally false impression. But I keep getting Amanda and Meredith's names. I do know the difference between the two.
It must have been
But
the day
Meredith,
that Amanda flushed the toilet, so she was in good graces.
yeah, she's gotten good. Yeah, exactly. Uh, um, Meredith had left, I think, to go hang out with some friends. And so Amanda was just sort of sitting there by herself. She's looking around. She sees basically a lot of old people at a classical music concert, but she's enjoying the fact, and she's sort of telling herself, "Look at me, I'm special. I'm a fan of classical music." And then she looks around and she sees a guy that she thinks looks like Harry Potter. You know what? I guess he probably does. And so she's sort of making eyes at him, and he's sort of looking back at her. And next thing you know, he comes over and sits down, and they strike up a conversation. Things go on from there. This is an Italian guy. He's from his father's a doctor. They've got lots and lots of money. He's basically a rich Italian kid who was pretty much inexperienced with women for whatever reason. And
Well, when your dad's a penis doctor, that happens.
Oh, is that what it is? Yeah, I guess. I guess so. But anyway, it's something like that. Anyway, something down in the nether regions.
Yeah.
Anyway, so they strike up this really very intense relationship. I mean, they go home and they have sex that evening, and then they're tight as can be for the next week or so.
Yeah, and they'd only known each other a week. I mean, that's what's kind of incredible about this, is how hot and heavy these two were. It almost seemed like Raphael's first girlfriend, almost, that wanted to be around him. Apparently there wasn't a lot of takers in the Harry Potter department, but he found one.
Yeah, well, I think he did refer to her as his first girlfriend, and he was not a teen. I mean, he was not a little teenager. He was 22, 23, something like that. He was a student who was studying computer science. Again, he was a real scholar. He was actually really working on some pretty important academic stuff at the time.
He also collected knives.
Yeah, he was also a collector of knives. He was a big fan of uh, manga, but really the more violent Japanese sort of manga. He liked video games too, which is not really uncommon.
Hadn't he had a problem in high school where there was some sort of assault that had taken place?
some there was something like that.
Yeah, and I don't know the details.
I don't know the details either. He had he also and he brags about this quite a bit, but he stayed high most of the time. He was a big fan of drugs, apparently mostly pot, but he'd used heroin and cocaine and other drugs. So he was very experienced in the drug world, but not so much the man-woman world. And you could say and Amanda, meanwhile, had shown up in initially in Germany, visiting some relatives. She came over there with her sister, who's 2 years younger, and was supposed to have been involved. Supposed to have gone. Her uncle in Germany had set up this internship for her for 2 weeks so she could earn some extra money, which she really needed. But she just blew that off, created a lot of family tension, and decided she was just going to go, party. Struck up a couple of quickie relationships with guys over there, and then latched on to Raphael. So they had been together for about a week. But it gets when you get into the events of November 1st, November 2nd, there's so many conflicting stories from them about what actually went on that it's impossible to tell exactly what went on at that point. What happened is what is known is there were a couple of phones that were found in a garden some distance from the house, cell phones. And this was reported to the local communications police, which I've never heard of such before, but apparently they have communications police in Italy, and they traced these phones to Meredith Kircher and one of the roommates. I can't recall which one.
It was a 5-minute walk where they found the phone from where they were.
Yeah,
just
I think it was one of Philomena's phones, but it's not really that important. But the Philomena, I believe, had loaned Meredith a phone for use in Italy, and she had another phone that she stayed with constantly because her mother in Britain had diabetes problems and was ill, and she was always wanted to stay in touch with her mother. So the communications police they figure out who these phones belong to. They show up at this little house, and there are Amanda and Raphael outside. It's pretty cool. It's in November. Amanda doesn't have a coat on. Raphael does have a coat on. There's a mop and a bucket by the front door, and they're looking a little iffy about the police showing up. The police come in. They tell the police. Amanda tells these police, that the door was open and so forth, and there was unflushed feces in not her bathroom, but the larger bathroom that the other two girls shared.
These people got to start flushing the toilets, man.
Yeah, they do need to. And then the police come in. They don't do a really thorough search of the place, but they almost immediately call the state police. and the state police send a unit out there to investigate what's going on. And then we get into one of these typical contentions about the facts of the case. Did Raphael call police before the communications police showed up or after? Well, he seems to have done it after they showed up and after they'd already called the state police. But anyway, at some point, Raphael, in a whisper, calls the local police and tells them that there's been a break-in at this house. They need to come there. So you've got like 3 different police units on the scene, which is already a recipe for chaos. And then the state police and the local police have warring jurisdictions and so forth. It's just real common in police agencies everywhere, I suppose. And meanwhile, Amanda had called her mother. This was about 1 or so in the afternoon, 12:31. She called her mother like around noon and said that the door was opened when she got. But despite all that, she decided she would
take a
get a shower anyway. She gets a shower. She gets out. She sees a bloody footprint on a bath mat. This still doesn't provoke any sense of alarm in Amanda. And for some reason, she noticed that somebody had taken a dump in the other bathroom and left it unflushed. And all of a sudden, Amanda, who was known for not flushing toilets, gets all it's ever done before. She called her mother all the time, but not in the middle of the night. And there wasn't a real obvious emergency going on at that point. And in fact, Amanda's story is that she was not concerned when she showed up back at the house after spending the night at Raphael's, that the door was open, but she walked in, didn't bother to check to see who was in there, what was in all the rooms. I mean, one of the rooms, there was a break-in. A window had been broken out. Glass was scattered everywhere. Another room had a door that was locked. But despite all this, she goes into the bathroom. She says her description is she was going to take a shower. She saw there was blood in the sink. But despite all that, she decided she would
take a
get a shower anyway. She gets a shower. She gets out. She sees a bloody footprint on a bath mat. This still doesn't provoke any sense of alarm in Amanda. And for some reason, she noticed that somebody had taken a dump in the other bathroom and left it unflushed. And all of a sudden, Amanda, who was known for not flushing toilets, gets all excited and goes back to Raphael and brings him back. That's the story.
Sick.
So, and the mop that was out there was supposedly for cleaning up something at Raphael's house that had happened the night before. And, there had been a leak there, supposedly. So the police come in, and eventually the locked door gets broken open. One of the other roommates, she calls one of the other roommates, I think it was Philomena, who showed up. Philomena, they said, there's a locked door back here. Meredith's door's locked. Philomena says, oh, she never locked her door. Amanda says, oh, she locked her door. But they decide they're going to break the door down anyway because Meredith has not been answering calls. They break the door down and they find Meredith Kircher's body on the floor, surrounded by blood, covered by a duvet, just a foot sticking out.
And that's another one of the big parts of this story that is always weird. She kept insisting to the cops that you wouldn't be able to get in. Her door's locked. She always locks her door, but all the other roommates say that she doesn't lock her door. And then, sure enough, they go to open it. It's not locked, and she's dead there on the floor. It, to me, seems as though she was trying to not let the cops come in.
And, immediately panic ensues. Amanda and Raphael are in the kitchen. So, and in the kitchen in the place, you cannot see into Meredith's bedroom from in the kitchen. They run out of the house, and Amanda immediately starts talking about how Meredith was found by the closet. Well, that's where she was killed, but that's not where she was found. She was found up closer to her bed, away from the closet. And it is a fairly small room, but it was big enough you could differentiate those areas. That raises a question: how did she know where Meredith's body should have been? And who? It raises all sorts of questions. Who moved the body? Why would you move a body? Who covered it with the duvet? The police, the local police show up. They have a consensus pretty early on that there must be a woman involved because the body was covered with the duvet, and they think that is something that a woman is more likely to do. Meredith had no clothes on. Some of her clothes have been cut off, and so it's assumed that there's a sexual component to the attack.
And was her throat? Was it slit?
Wasn't split so much as it had been. There was a huge wound that had been in one side of the throat that had gone all the way to the other side, and then there was a smaller wound on the other side of her neck, and she did bleed to death, but it wasn't quite a wound like you would usually think of as a slit throat. And the experts who looked at this later determined it would have taken her a while to have died, 5 to 10 minutes. Basically, she would have been choking on her own blood. So that was a particularly horrible way to die. She was also heavily bruised. There were a lot of finger marks and hand marks on there where she'd obviously been held by multiple hands. Some of the finger marks were smaller, indicating a woman's hand. She had very few defensive type wounds. She had fairly long fingernails. There were no fragments of skin found under the nails or anything that indicated any kind of defense going on. So pretty early on, they determined that it would be very difficult to downright impossible for somebody to inflict that kind of wound on somebody who had martial arts. She had martial arts training. She's a young, healthy woman, average size. She appears to be, I don't know how tall she was, but she appears to be at least fairly tall. So she apparently put up no physical defense. And the question is how did that even come about? How would somebody engineer stabbing somebody in the throat like that without the person who's being attacked just trying to defend themselves? And it's a tricky scenario at best. And it's not one that's ever been really explained very well, though some of the crime theories fit it pretty well.
So when the police are kind of going through everything, one of the more famous scenes is you have Amanda and Raphael outside, and they are comforting each other, hugging, kissing,
Mooching, yes.
kind of getting a little horned up outside. I mean, it was pretty deep PDA for, look, obviously this doesn't prove anything, but you'd be hard pressed to find a couple people doing this during a search of the house where their roommate, who was a friend of hers, was
Right.
was just brutally murdered and raped, that is just it is just odd behavior. It's not proof of anything, but it's odd behavior. And once again, once you start tallying these things up, the totality of everything starts to really paint a picture, that whatever was happening was not normal. Amanda was not acting normal. Raphael was not acting normal, and
Right.
um, and then you get into, once again, this thing where
And
they're
and Amanda looked pretty rough in a sense that she looked like she didn't look like she'd had a shower, but she supposedly had taken a shower there.
she had
Uh,
right.
the investigators commented that she smelled. They noticed the smell of sex on her, which may be subjective, but it's the fact that they said that indicates maybe she didn't take a shower. She doesn't look like she had a shower.
No, she
Uh,
she did not.
and then what happened pretty soon after that, they go down to the police station. They're obviously going to be talking to the various parties involved, the roommates and so forth, trying to figure out how this could have happened. Meredith had been involved in a fairly brief relationship with one of the Italian men downstairs, but they were all out of town, and that their alibis checked out. So they were ruled out very quickly.
The alibi is is just, once again, in this. It's just, yeah. You're right.
And
Those people had alibis, but
yeah, yeah. And then, I mean, if you're off in another city, you didn't come back and kill somebody like that and then go back to the city. It's just overnight, sneak out of your parents' house and do it or something. Unless you're really strongly motivated to do that. And that this didn't seem to have that kind of. There wasn't anybody who would seem to have that kind of incentive to do that. This is a fairly new, somewhat casual relationship between Meredith and this young man downstairs. They go to the police station, and everybody else is broken up and crying. And Amanda and Raphael are making faces at each other, giggling a little bit. She's putting her feet up in his lap.
it's cute.
And this is the other people involved, her friends, roommates, etc., are really put off by this behavior. The police notice it, and it raises suspicions. What's going on with these two?
Yeah, yeah, and so they're waiting to make these statements, and they reveal they revealed things about the murder of Meredith that they shouldn't have known. And once again, just like so many other interrogation stories, they talk about this brutal interrogation. And that is really contradicted by the police, that the interrogation was not, really even an interrogation to speak of. It was more of, I think, so they have her write down a list of people that had visited. Is that correct?
Well, I think that's probably true. She was questioned for. They were both questioned for several days. They were questioned quite a bit, and then I think on the fifth. So that was the second. On the fifth, I think they asked Raphael to come in for questioning late at night, which I don't know. You want to raise questions about the case. I think some of the questions that are raised about the investigation are valid.
Yeah.
Why did they need to talk to him at 10:30 or 11 at night. But anyway, he went into the police station.
Well, he was busy actually, Gary. He was eating dinner. Remember?
Well, he did. He was eating dinner, but he eventually showed up at the police station.
I just think it's funny that he said, "Oh, I'll be." I mean, you know, they're investigating a murder, but yeah, asking him. I think it was about 8. Wasn't it about 8 or 9? I say it was late.
Yeah. But anyway, so eventually they show. I forgot about the eating dinner thing. They show up. They both. Amanda, who was not asked to come in, shows up with him because she didn't feel comfortable being at Raphael's house all alone, she said. Now, you know, maybe that's true. I mean, I don't know why it wouldn't be true. But
get
anyway,
your story straight on the way, too.
Yeah. So they're there for a couple of hours talking to Raphael. And one reason they wanted to talk to him was because they were looking at a shoe print that seemed to match his shoes, that was a shoe print left in blood. It turned out that was not correct, that there was a shard of glass that should have shown up on his shoe print that shows up in or showed up on his shoe that shows up in the shoe print. And it was actually not his shoe, but they had a valid reason for talking to him. So they bring him in there and they're talking with him, and he said, well, you know, the story and Amanda and I told you about what we did, how we were, you know, at my house, my apartment all evening. That's not really true. I was there, but Amanda was gone from about 9 till about 1. And that was a big change in story. So she had all this time unaccounted for. Well, this is also about the time when they believe the murder occurred based on the forensic evidence. So this suddenly puts Amanda back in the spotlight, and the police had suspicions all along that maybe they were somehow involved because they just seemed kind of hinky. And so they asked to speak, you know, asking Amanda in to speak, and they tell her, you know, they question her some. She's not being treated as a suspect at that point, but they want an explanation about where she was. Now, she had said initially that she had been scheduled to work at this club she worked at called La Chic there was a guy from the Congo named Patrick Lumumba who ran the club, and he had called her or texted her and said she didn't need to come in that evening. And she texted back and said, oh, great, that's fine. See you later. And it was in Italian, so that's not what she actually said, but that's a rough translation. And anyway, in the Italian version of this means I will see you at you know, I'm going to see you at a specific time that we've already agreed upon. While the American version of see you later means I'll see you later sometime or other.
Yep.
You know, and it doesn't really mean that much. It's almost like, you know, good wishes or something. But anyway,
break a leg.
Yeah. It doesn't have a whole lot of meaning to it. It's very indefinite. So there was, and this is the sort of thing where there was this cultural linguistic problem throughout the case, and it pervades the whole thing. But they bring Amanda in and they say, well, you know, and so she said she stayed at Raphael's. And they were kind of light on the details at that point about what they'd done. But anyway, they came back in and they said, well, you know, Raphael is not giving you this. He's not giving you the alibi that you had earlier. And before you know it, she's written out a statement in which she says that she was there, that she met Patrick Lumumba at the basketball courts near where the house was, that he'd gone back with her to the house when Meredith was there, or Meredith showed up at some point. Either she was there or she showed up. She wasn't clear about that. And that Patrick had an interest in Meredith, who he'd met once or twice or a few times, and but apparently did not know well at all. And that she was in the kitchen doing whatever she does in the kitchen, and then Patrick goes into Meredith's room, and the next thing you know, she hears screaming, and Patrick killed her. So she puts herself in her statement at the scene of the crime, and arguably at least somewhat a party to it.
Yeah, and it's not really a confession, but it's more of a putting it on somebody else. Like, I was there, but it wasn't me.
Yeah, and it's pretty common for people who are involved in these kind of crimes, and we see this like with Jesse Miskelly.
Of course,
he kept trying to leave early from the scene of the crime, though the more they talked to him, the longer he stayed.
Yep.
Well, what she's doing is not so different, and what's also not so different is, and this is unusual, is usually when they get if they get these confessions and they turn out to be false confessions. And we can argue about whether any of those two are any of Jesse Miskelly's confessions, or this multiple confessions from so-called confessions from Amanda are even confessions. But we could argue about some parts of this. But the thing is, she blamed somebody else for the actual murder, very much like Jesse tried to put almost all the blame on the other two, Jason and Damien. He minimized his own role. Well, if she had any kind of role in this, she minimized it.
Very common.
And basically put it all on Patrick. Well, it's not that common in false confessions, though. It really is. They usually confess. I did it. Mm-hmm. She's not confessing she did it. She's saying, "Oh yes, I was there. Somebody else did it."
Right.
But what is common in confessions is to minimize your own role.
Right, and that's what she that's the part that she was doing that. But you're right. It is. It's a common practice to kind of like leave one foot out the door while you're peeking around the corner. But
right. Yeah. And this one statement was at 1:30, and the stories vary. And soon after this, they told the prosecutor was notified. Manini was notified about this. He shows up and he talks to Amanda a bit and tells her, she doesn't have to say anything else, et cetera, and they put her in a jail cell. According to some versions of this and others, she's subjected to this grueling, 14-hour interrogation, which doesn't make any more sense than Jesse Miskelly supposedly had a 12-hour interrogation. It just didn't happen. Didn't happen with her either. What did happen is she gave another statement at 5:30 or so, in which she basically repeats the same story, but she says she's really confused. She doesn't remember exactly what happened, but this is what she seems to remember. And then later on, she writes a letter the following day where she talks about how he was actually with Raphael, but it all seems like a dream, and she's confused and she doesn't know what's happened. And the prosecutors are confused by all this would be an understatement. I think it's confusing. What was she doing and why was she doing this? There's an argument to be made that she was so heavily coerced that she just simply broke down and did this in some sort of bizarre sort of brainwashing technique. And, it did happen late at night, and no doubt she was tired, but the questioning had not gone on for hours. She claims she was also slapped up side of the head a couple of times. She said initially she was slapped every time she got something wrong. And I'm sure she would have had a serious concussion if that had been true. But she said she was slapped a couple of times.
In the back of the head and the front of the head.
Yeah, sometimes it was to the back of the head, sometimes it was the front of the head. She couldn't really say who was doing this, and it's really question. And she and her parents were both actually charged at some point with libeling the police and prosecutors for making these allegations without any proof. The one problem there is they did not tape these interviews, and the prosecutor said, "Well, we just don't do that." And sort of these, just routine witness questioning. So again, it created there's. You go back with any of these cases and you go, well, if only they'd had that on tape, we'd know what really happened. Well, it didn't happen.
Right.
And maybe it should have, but it didn't. So anyway, as a result of all this, these stories, the prosecutor determines that Raphael and Amanda are both involved, and they're charged with being involved with this murder, along with Lumumba, and they go arrest Lumumba at his home, I believe. But and he's thrown into jail for 2 weeks.
Yeah, it's incredible that somebody that was awfully nice, and maybe he had ulterior motives, but he employed her. And by the way, I've heard that she was a shitty worker, and that she didn't have a great work ethic when it came to labor like that. But that Patrick Lumumba had given her a job where she could kind of make some money for her whatever she was doing in Italy. And then she turns right around and accuses him of being the murderer.
Right. And she claims that the police came up with Patrick Lumumba's name and it didn't come from her, but she's the one who knew Patrick.
Right.
I mean, so why would the police come up with his name out of all the people in Perugia?
Yeah. Anyway, he sat in jail for 2 weeks because of this.
And one of the great ironies of this case, from start to today, is today Amanda poses as a spokesman for the wrongfully accused. She stands convicted. She stands convicted in Italy this day of wrongfully accusing Patrick Lumumba of his involvement in this crime. She destroyed the poor man's life, destroyed his business, no doubt created some tensions at home, no doubt, right? You would think.
Absolutely.
And for no reason. And yes, maybe on it, you could argue, well, she was under all this pressure and so forth, but she wasn't under all that pressure for 14 days. She could have said, I just plain lied. It wasn't Patrick. I don't remember who it was. Or, she could have come up with something else. She just let him sit there. He was only released because police did their due diligence. They checked around, and he had a very solid alibi that he was at his bar that evening, which shouldn't be a surprise to anybody. And so, and they let him out after 14 days.
Yeah, and it's also worth noting that Patrick had won somewhat of a civil lawsuit against her for this defamation, and that she to this very day owes him about $40,000 in US currency. Amanda Knox made millions of dollars off of her memoir that was horribly written, and has not paid Patrick Lumumba a cent. And that
I've heard that. I don't know if she's ever, maybe at some point she did. She certainly hasn't been in a hurry to pay it. If she's paid him since the last thing I saw about that, which I haven't seen anything about that, haven't seen anything to indicate she's paid him.
Not
then right, because he's going to have to go to quite some trouble to collect.
Yeah, and she's not a very good person.
No,
so she has no intention to pay that.
It's the least she could do, and it's chump change to her at this point.
She's rich. She's rich off of murder. You know,
Yeah.
whatever her involvement is, and we're going to discuss that because there are a ton of questions about this case, and one of the questions obviously is that just sticks out is, and this is more going to be, you know, more opinion based, but uh, why do you think that this happened? Why do you think there was motive? I mean, do you have an opinion on that?
Well, I to me, it's to me this is a real mystery because at the heart of it, I mean, my inclination with a lot of things is to go with the simplest explanation, and the simplest explanation is that Rudy Goudet broke into the apartment, and there's questions about how that would have been engineered. But well, I won't get into all that right now. But he broke into the apartment, and then Meredith shows up, so he goes in, rapes her, and sexually assaults her and kills her, and then leaves. And Amanda and Raphael had nothing to do with it. Now that is like the simplest explanation you can come up with.
And
the
could have
problem
happened,
is,
yeah.
and right, and it kind of makes sense. And maybe if they caught on to Rudy early on, maybe, and he, maybe that's how it would have stood. The problem is when you look at you look at the facts of the case, there's oodles of evidence that really it doesn't really add up to that scenario. And I've already alluded to the fact that it would be virtually impossible for one person to have actually committed the murder the way it's described. Now, there's Rudy's fingerprints are at the scene. His DNA is all over Meredith's room. There is no DNA from Amanda in the room. Let's just concede that. There was this is when we get into the tricky stuff. There was a bra clasp that was found that was cut away from Meredith's bra that was it was seen early on, but for some reason, they did some shoddy work. And part of the shoddy work was they didn't retrieve this bra clasp from the scene until 46 days later. When they did, they found Raphael's DNA on that bra clasp, which puts him in that at the crime scene if you go by that DNA evidence. There's also quite a bit of other DNA evidence. There's the blood on the sink that I mentioned earlier. It's a mix. There's a mix of blood from Amanda and from Meredith. When does this happen? When do roommates? I admit they shared a bathroom. You would expect them both to have DNA in there. When did they both bleed on the same spot? Very strange. There was also a spot of mixed blood in Philomena's room. How did that happen? Where would that have come from? Who would have been the source of that? Meredith certainly didn't put it in there. Where would Rudy get some of Amanda's blood to mix in with Meredith's blood if he was just going to go there and drop a bit of her blood in there? And that's really, there's no other blood to speak of in that room. But these mixtures of blood are very strange. There's the question, one of the big questions is when we talk about cell phones, Amanda and Raphael both turned their cell phones off around 8:30 or so that night. Amanda had never done this before. She never turned her cell phone off at night. Raphael usually talked to his father every night, his father who sort of hovered over him and micromanaged his life, apparently, called him every night to see how he was doing. And his father called twice that night, once on a landline, once on the cell phone, and couldn't get through. The phone was turned off. He never did this except this one night. Why this one night would they do that? It was not their first night together, and it was not some sort of special night. It was just supposedly they were just hanging out at Raphael's apartment.
And
it raises a real question. And then they said they didn't turn the phones back on until they woke up the next day. They said they woke up late in the morning, but the cell phones were turned on at 6:30 in the morning.
Right. And some people turn their cell phones off when they go to bed. These were not two people that did that. They didn't do that, and they were not known to do that. That's very important to know.
Right. And they also were not people who went to bed at 8:30 at night, generally speaking, apparently.
Right. So, and just real quick with the bra clasp, that was exceptionally strong DNA, an exceptionally strong DNA match to Raphael. And it was tested by two different labs, and it was his. I mean, it was undoubtedly his DNA.
There's no question. There's no question that it was Raphael's DNA. The question is, how did it get on the bra strap? Did Raphael himself handle the bra strap, which is like really puts him at the scene, or is it some case of contamination? The fact that they let the bra clasp sort of float around the murder room for 46 days allowed the defense to bring up the idea that that this was a case of contamination. And it's one of those things where if you don't have anything else tying the guy to it, you can sort of bring in the question of doubt there. But and what happened with the courts is sometimes the courts bought that idea and sometimes they didn't.
Gary, well, the problem with the contamination theory, especially with Raphael, is, I mean, that's just that's the strength of the DNA really, leaves little doubt about the contamination, aspect of it. The way that they worded it is that his DNA was an extremely strong match. That is hard to do by contamination. It really is.
I would think so. It sounds. I mean, I would think so. And then, but they had you have experts on both sides who disagree about the bra strap.
Well, you pay them enough money, they'll say anything, right?
Well, I was about to say that that's true in almost all these cases. And we could get into speaking of payments, but the way there's a whole episode you could do about the way this was covered in the media, and the PR experts got involved, and the lawyers, the shills for hire that were involved in all this. It's very interesting, and honestly, the case is more interesting than I ever thought it was when I just viewed it in sort of a superficial sort of way as gossipy tabloid sort of case, because there's a lot of legal issues involved in this. The blood, the shoe print, the footprint on the bath mat is not Amanda's footprint. It's too big. It's not Rudy's footprint. It is compatible with Raphael's footprint.
The knife collector.
Right. The knife collector.
Look, and once again, not proof of anything other than it's once again we're talking about totality of the situation here.
Right. Another as investigation went on, they not only looked at evidence that once they'd arrested Raphael Solicito, they went to his apartment. They were looking through his kitchen, various knives. I see a big knife that looks like it really would have conformed to the knife that sort of went under her chin and through her neck. They see this. They pull the knife out. They run DNA testing on this knife, and they find Amanda's blood.
What do you know?
Around the handle, and they find a small trace of Meredith's blood in a position on the blade. but it's only 5 cells. So they can only run. It's not a question of whether it was her DNA or not, but it's not a strong question. But to meet the laboratory standards, you're really supposed to test it more than once, particularly on a small sample. So, but they only had enough DNA there to test it one time. So they did one test. It shows up as Meredith's blood. There's not really a good explanation of how that could have gotten there. Raphael told police that, oh, yeah, he accidentally nicked Meredith one time when she was over at his house and they were cooking together, which, the stories that these two told really just made things worse for them all the time. It just makes it sound worse. There's no evidence that she ever cooked with him, and I don't think there's any evidence she was at his apartment. So, they weren't really close. Meredith was not happy with Amanda inviting strange men home all the time. That was another big problem they had.
Yeah, I honestly, and once again, speculation. They're just. I'm assuming that there was some sort of blowout, and because they had been known to, like you said, they weren't getting along well, and it seemed like Amanda was pretty used to getting her way, and she was, the princess. And I'm not making light of it, and I'm not making fun of her, but honestly, that is, just this blue-eyed, pale-skinned girl from Seattle, pretty, kind of used to getting her way, who bought bleach at a corner store, uh, who could not be mistaken. The clerk herself said she had bright blue eyes, pale skin. She did not look like she was from here. It was her. Why is she buying bleach? Um, and why? What were they?
Early in the morning the next day.
Yeah, what are they cleaning up? I mean,
and then she's got a mop. They've got a mop over there that morning, and they're surprised. They didn't call the police.
No,
they were surprised. Oh, the police showed up. What are you doing here? Oh crap! The police have showed up.
Right. And so they're basically what they're doing is they're getting ready to clean up this crime scene. Why, other than the fact that they're trying to hide something, there's no real good answer for why you would just start cleaning up blood. Amanda has said that she was on her period and that's how blood got in the sink. Personally, I have never bled in the sink from my period, and
maybe I'm not sure how you do that, and I probably will never learn.
Yeah.
The other thing she claimed was she had her ears pierced, and she had multiple piercings put in her ear to be one of the cool kids in Perugia.
Yeah.
And she claimed that she took out her earrings, and that was where the blood came from.
Yeah.
Again, it's certainly not impossible or even implausible, but it has the feeling of a desperate explanation. What there's not really a good explanation for is, they go through this whole house, the forensic people go through this whole house, and there's virtually no sign of Amanda in the house other than these blood spots that we're talking about. I mean, they find one fingerprint from her in the whole house. Does that indicate somebody cleaned up quite a bit? I think it certainly does,
especially when she lived there.
Yeah, she lived there, and she supposedly was there a lot. She would have been there a lot because she didn't really go to class that much. She wasn't going to class that much, which was one reason she was working.
And the thing that about Rudy is that he had an abundance of DNA all over that apartment as well. Rudy Goodday did not live there, and that there were they were cleaning up the morning. Well, who were they? Were they getting ready to put it all on Rudy? I mean, They're cleaning up their messes, and it just, you don't just
his footprint, his bloody footprints did go basically down the hall, go out of Meredith's bedroom, down the hall, and out the door. They weren't real obvious, but they were there. They were discernible. It's just, you had to sort of look for it. I'm surprised they weren't bloodier than that, which may indicate some kind of cleanup, but I'm not really sure that was what was involved. But what else? We haven't talked about this. What was described as staging of the scene, and I think the cleanup is part of that. But the break-in supposedly occurred by Rudy Goudet. It supposedly occurred by Rudy Goudet throwing a 9-pound rock, something like 16 feet, up through this window, shutters were closed, breaking the glass.
You ever thrown a 4-pound medicine ball? It's hard.
I have. I've thrown an 8-pound medicine ball not for very long.
Did you throw it 16 feet up in the air?
No.
I don't think so.
Maybe you could, but
no, I definitely couldn't.
I'm old and frail.
And I also couldn't rip a phone book in half either. I mean, it's just not.
But so that is quite a feat, actually, and to be able to throw that weight of a rock,
the boulder,
accurately up through a window.
It's awesome.
And it does look like it was broke. The glass does seem to have been broken from the outside, but you can break the glass from the outside by simply opening the window, opening the other side of the window, sticking your arm through, taking a rock and throwing it through there.
Or a normal size rock. Yeah, that would work too.
Yeah. Or you can even take the 9-pound rock from downstairs, bring it up, and throw it through the window. I can do that. I can throw a 9-pound rock through a window from 2 feet away.
Yeah, sure.
And the problem, there were logistics problems with the actual rock getting up there. Though it's possible for somebody to do that, it's also possible for somebody to climb the wall and get in through the window. I am not understanding how it was possible for Rudy Goudet to do these fairly difficult but possible gymnastics feats and then get in through the window with all this broken glass and not cut himself. So there's no sign of any kind of blood or anything on the windowsill. How did he manage to do that?
I mean, if he's throwing 9-pound rocks 16 feet, he's a remarkable specimen when it comes to physical strength. Now,
yeah, he's a Superman. And by the way, the idea that he somehow overpowered Meredith. Well, if the guy was, I don't know, the size of George Floyd, you might think, well, he's just so big that he might overpower. He's not. He's kind of a shrimp. He's I don't know his exact height, but he's very much average height and below average, I would say, in weight. He was he's a young guy. I'm sure he's strong and fit and all that, but he's not some sort of imposing physical specimen by any means.
Yeah, I mean, this friggin' rock is huge.
Yeah, and so anyway, the glass was scattered over the room, but it was on top of clothing that had been thrown out on the floor during the so-called ransacking. The ransacking occurred in a room where there was a computer. There could have been jewelry. There was like a little armoire or whatever where, most young women usually have some jewelry around. The ransacking didn't include a look for the jewelry that might have been there. There was an expensive purse that was in there that was not taken. The computer was not taken. When Raphael called the police, they asked if anything had been taken. He said no. Well, raises the question: how would Raphael know that?
Yeah, right. especially knowing her for a week.
Right, and a cursory glance around the place, it's not possible to determine that. You'd really, if you lived there, if that was your room, you'd still have to go in there and look around and say, I wonder if something's gone, and it would take you a while to figure it out. Raphael determined almost immediately that nothing had been taken. There was stuff taken out of Meredith's purse, money, credit cards, etc. So there was a bit of a robbery going on.
Yeah, was it that Rudy took the train out of town? Was what happened?
He did take the train out of town. He hung around for a day or two, then went to Germany, and
smart.
And then he wasn't so smart when he got back on the train and didn't buy a ticket and got arrested.
Yeah, I mean, he's a criminal. That's he's actually I think he's about to be released shortly.
They've been saying that sort of thing for a while, but I think he is going to be pretty soon.
Yeah, and I wanted to let me play this for you real quick, and I want to just get your reaction to this this little clip. And here it is.
I continue to this day to be shocked that he is the forgotten killer, the one who was quietly tucked away, convicted of a lesser crime, and does not have to live with the burden of being forever associated with Meredith's death.
Okay, so that's Amanda just a month ago talking about the release of Rudy Gaudet. Basically, poor me. I mean, it's all his fault. So it was Rudy's fault, but then it was Patrick's fault before that. And I mean, she was really willing to stick it to whoever she could have to get herself off the hook, and she continues to do that to this day because Rudy implicates both Raphael Solecito and Amanda Knox in the murder. What'd you think of that clip there, Gary?
Well, what struck me is that she is pretty adept at throwing out the talking points that's been suggested to her by public relations people. The forgotten killer she's got two prominent supporters. John Douglas, who's an effing idiot, and really screwed up his analysis of the West Memphis 3 case, and I read what he's written about this case, and he's just making stuff up out of his head, but he gets paid well for doing that, so that's fine. He's a prominent profiler. He gets to make up stuff and pretend he's an expert. And Douglas Preston, who had a huge grudge against the prosecutor Manini over the Monster of Florence case, they both got sort of dragged into this, and they put out a book called The Forgotten Killer. So guess what Amanda does? She throws out Forgotten Killer. He doesn't have to live with the consequences of this, and so forth. I think Rudy probably would disagree with that. I mean, he's still he's still in prison. It's not as if when he gets out that he's just going to be able to go get a job someplace in Italy and everybody's going to go, "Oh, Rudy Gaudet. Oh, okay. Well, we'll hire you. No problem."
He's going to write a book, and he's going to probably tell the most accurate. He's a murderer, and you can't really rely on anything any of these people say. But
you really can't.
But his telling might be one of the most accurate. It will probably be the most accurate of the three. He's the one that has the most incentive to tell the truth. He doesn't deny that he wasn't a part of the murder at all. He just says that that those two, Amanda and Raphael, were involved. And he's going to implicate her when he gets out, and his book deal will fetch probably a good amount, but it's already in the works. I was reading about it the other day, and people will read it. I'll read it.
Yeah.
And I would be interested. Look, I've already heard what Amanda and Raphael say, and I would like to hear his point of view.
And and she certainly had plenty of supporters who've written books. I met Douglas Preston, John Douglas, this woman out in Seattle, Ann Bremner, who I wasn't familiar with her, but apparently she showed up on TV fairly regularly on true crime things. She sort of injected herself into the case, and she's got a book coming out pretty soon. And there's a whole stack of other ones by various journalists of varying quality. Some of them are pretty good, and some of them really are not so good. And what's interesting to me is you had, among other things, you had a war in media and all this, and it played a huge role in the way the case played out. You had the Italian press who really didn't understand Amanda, and even Americans were off. Many Americans were put off by her. Really, she's oblivious. She simply has no idea of how to act, and it is disturbing. I mean, I think she's a very weird chick, and she's a very weird chick now. She's married to a kind of a weird guy. They got a book of poetry out. But I'm not saying there's anything wrong with books of poetry, but spare me. And from formerly convicted killers, even if they've been acquitted, I just soon not hear about it. But she was treated. She was, angel face with the devil with an angel face, and a whore and all this other stuff in the Italian press, and she was a foxy Knoxy and this conniving vixen in the British press for the most part.
Yeah.
They were in the Meredith camp. Her Meredith's father was a well-known journalist, so he had plenty of friends in the press. And then you get into America, and Amanda's parents really controlled. They dictated access to who would have access to them based on which side of the case they were on in America. So yeah, we'll come on ABC and talk to you, but you've got to understand, you can't ask us. You have to be a friend to the case. You cannot be an enemy. You can't ask us challenging or intimidating questions or accusing questions.
Yeah, like why did you implicate Patrick Lumumba? Why'd you do that? Nobody wants to. It's just like that's a question that should be asked to her every time she gets in front of a microphone. And she'll have a different answer every time she gets in front of it too. But
yeah, she can say she regrets it. I think she got. I just watched like an hour or two ago. I rewatched the Diane Sawyer interview, and I think they get into it a little bit there. But she regrets it, and she's sorry, and she wishes she hadn't done it. But it's not very convincing.
Well, why do it in the first place? I mean, they're like that's the major. I know why she did it in the first place, because she was throwing stuff against the wall to see what would stick, and at that time it bought her a little bit of time, and it stuck. And like you said, after the police did their due diligence. Gary, we're actually almost out of time, but we're gonna have to do we'll do a second part on the trial, because that's where it gets even crazier.
Yeah, and the Italian judicial system is so
weird,
complicated,
and odd, yeah,
and weird. It's that I'm almost leery even getting into it too much, because I'm not sure I understand all that. I mean, I can follow the ins and outs when I'm reading it, but spouting it back, I don't know if I'd pass that pop test or not.
Well, we're going to give it a try anyway. How's that? And it is a cluster. There's 100 different turns. This case was so muddied. I mean, it was one of those cases. It's one of those cases, man.
Well, I think more than anything else, I think it is, and I want to reiterate this, it's truly disgraceful that Amanda Knox gets to present herself and get paid for this as a spokesman for the wrongfully convicted, when she is somebody who accused somebody she knew was innocent and let him sit in jail for 2 weeks, ruined the man's life, and hasn't even paid him back the money she owes. And she acts like she's a spokesman for the victims of these overzealous prosecutors. It's pathetic.
Yeah, she goes on these talk shows, not talk like these podcasts. She did one with I don't know if you're familiar with a guy named Theo Vaughn.
No.
But he's like a comedian podcaster, and she comes on his show and she's talking about the Innocence Project and that kind of stuff. And she goes on somebody's show, this lady named Whitney Cummings, and they're having a grand old time talking and laughing, and these people aren't well versed in the case, so they don't really know, and she comes off fairly decent, but I will tell you that when there's a podcast called King and the Sting, and Theo Vaughn and a guy named Brendan Schaub, Brendan Schaub was talking about Amanda Knox, and Theo says, well, I had her on my podcast, and he goes, did you have security here? And he goes, no, why? And he goes, because she's a killer. And Theo goes, I don't know if she's a killer. He goes, but she definitely looks like she could kill. And the other guy goes, oh, you're just being a homer because you talked to her, because you had her on. and he was dead serious, going, she is a killer, guy. Like, you got to understand. And Theo's saying, I don't know. And he goes, oh man, you guys are just homers. But I think it's almost 50-50, man. It's split. It's very split down the middle on. I think everybody, let's say everybody, I'm painting with a broad brush here. I think most people would agree that she knew more than she let on. And I think even a casual person could state that.
I can't come up with, I would never say, oh, I know exactly what happened in that room. Nobody knows except the people who are there.
Correct.
I will say that I find it hard to come up with credible scenarios where they're not, those Raphael and Amanda aren't implicated in some way, even if it's just some sort of sloppy after the fact cleanup that they should have just confessed to begin with. And why would they do it to begin with? I have no idea.
Yeah, my first instinct, and my instincts aren't always the best, but if I see blood in a house and it's not mine, you're gonna want to call the cops. It's just probably the smart move. I'm not gonna go buy bleach and start going cleaning it up, especially if I did nothing wrong. And
especially if there's a door that's still locked.
And she locked it all the time, remember?
And nobody's answering from within.
Yeah, and where there's smoke, there's fire, and there was plenty of smoke here. But we will, if you're willing, we will talk about the court case and I call it the false exoneration, because, by the way, when she was exonerated, quote unquote, in this exoneration, they talked about how she had Meredith's blood on her hands that she had washed off. Were you familiar with that?
I did not see that.
Yeah, so that's in the exoneration of her. That's how, like, they state in there that even though that she had blood on her hands that she was washing off, that's in her exoneration page. You can, it's clear for you to read. It's
well, I'll think. I mean, there's thousands of pages of stuff on this, but
absolutely,
I will take a look at it. But I'm not surprised.
No, and it's not much of an. I mean, it's better than what Damien, Jason, and Jesse got, but it's really not. It's still not very good. You know what I mean? It's not a great exoneration, if you ask me. And
no,
by any means.
No, and I have to say, I don't feel as strongly. I'm not as tilted as strongly toward guilt in this as I am in that case.
Me neither.
Simply because there's just a huge unknown there about what actually happened. Mm-hmm. I think I know exactly what happened or very close to what happened in the West Memphis 3 case based on Miss Kelly's confessions, among other things.
Right.
And we don't have that level of specificity in this case. We just don't.
There is much more to the story that we will probably never know.
Yeah, and in the meantime, it's another tragic, horrible death that really, in retrospect, seems so pointless.
Yeah, and it's just, and it's one of those cases that seems to make a resurgence every couple of years where people really start to get into it again. And as I've been noticing with the West Memphis Three, the international attention has seemed to have grown in the UK and in Australia. And maybe this has something to do with the new HBO Max app that has been launched over there now, and quarantine also has something to do with this.
That has something to do with it, and there's also just the simple fact that Damien Eccles and Amanda Knox just simply won't go away.
Yeah,
they even hang out with each other.
I know, they're turds. They really are. And it's not even, and I'm not even talking about just because like they killed people. They're weird people, man. They're just weird. And I can say that when I say weird, I mean more creepy than weird. They're creepy. Gary, thank you very much. And we got it. I'm telling you, are you in on the trial? We need to talk about it.
Oh yeah, we'll do that. I don't think this is it's an incredibly complex case, particularly when you get into the legal angles on it. I can talk about it.
Oh yeah, we can handle it.
I can talk about it. I can almost talk about it now, but I could talk about it now, but I'm sure I'd get something wrong. I don't like to get things wrong.
Look,
but,
I got something wrong earlier.
We talked about that a little bit.
I know, and
it happened.
I'm so bummed because I really was getting into telling the story, and instead of saying he pointed out where, I'd say he walked him to the point. Well, he kind of did he did with his fingers. You know what I'm saying? But I do apologize for that. It got a little. I put a disclaimer up, but it's still not far off from what I said. Look, I mean, the fact is that he told him right where it was. So,
yeah. Well, it's cool.
Yeah.
As long as you're not deliberately misleading people, you're fine.
Well, that's my biggest goal, is to tell the kind of the truth about it. And once again, in this case with Amanda Knox, just like you, I'm not sold on anything really, other than I'm pretty sure that they were involved, and that they were probably a part of the murder. But I could never say that, like you said, with 100% clarity, and I just couldn't. Not right. It wouldn't be an honest take. So
yeah. But I certainly can't say, I'm sure that she's absolutely innocent either. I couldn't even come close to that.
Well, that is one thing I could say that I'm 100% sure of, is that she knows a lot more, and that she was most likely involved in some way, shape, or form. Also, Raphael, also Rudy, and that's a Three's Company that I want no part of. I'll tell you that right now. And thank you for listening to the No Big Deal podcast.
Thanks, Joshua.
Hey, Gary, got anything to plug going out? What are you working on?
Just the usual stuff. I do have a resumption of my own podcast on the West Memphis 3 case, called The Case Against. You can find it on Podbean. It's also on Apple Podcasts. I've got a couple long-term book projects I'm working on that revolve around wrongful convictions, but I'm not going to say anything for that anytime soon. And I'm going to start working on an audiobook version of the books I've written on the West Memphis 3. So
very excited about that. And as always, the link to your books will be in the description of the video. And thank you guys for listening. Gary, I always appreciate talking to you. It's always fun, and I'm sure I'll talk to you real soon.
Okay. Bye, Josh.
Take care. Bye-bye. Gary Meese, ladies and gentlemen, he's the man. He definitely is the coolest. And
A series of abductions
Oops.
terrorize a college town.
sounds like a Forensic Files episode. Love that. Anyway, thanks for watching and hanging out. And I have a lot of other work with Gary that we've done that we're gonna do. He will be a live panel guest soon. He's awesome. He's an author, a podcaster. In a lot of ways, he's a mentor of mine. He's taught me a lot about the accuracy of the things that I'm supposed to be talking about. Meaning, instead of like when I speculate, I should tell people that I'm speculating, and when I'm stating facts, you gotta really stick to what you know. And when you're talking about facts, you present them as facts, and when you're stating your opinion, you got to state them as your opinion. And sometimes a lot of that gets crossed over today. And he taught me a lot. He's taught me a lot about how to stay kind of in the pocket, journalism in general. He's taught me a lot about. He's taught me a lot about journalism in general, and it's funny because Gary is a prominent author. And he sold a lot of books, and he was in the newspaper business for a long time. Gary was, and was the chief editor at the West Memphis Times. And I really got into the West Memphis 3 case. I've been into that for a really long time, 10 plus years probably, and he's been in it longer. And it's one of the most heated and debated, I guess you'd call it, true crime stories ever. But it's weird because I never thought it was that controversial. And I always leaned towards the guilt of them. And anyway, when I was podcasting, I just made it a goal of mine I did a 3-part series on them, on the case of the West Memphis 3, because it's a huge case and it takes a lot. And so I didn't know who Gary was, but then I was looking up some stuff and his name came up, and he had written 3 books about the case. Blood on Black, Where the Monsters Go, and then The Case Against the West Memphis 3. And you can get all those on Amazon. You can get all of those on Amazon. Oh, thank you so much. That is so appreciated. Chats, Crime, and Coffee, visiting my faves. And so what he does, so I look him up and I go, man, I want to really talk. I heard him on a couple podcasts. I heard him on this podcast called William Ramsey. And then I heard him on some other podcast. So I went all stalker and looked him up on Facebook, like I'm sure happens to all of us. I don't know how else to get a hold of people if it's not Facebook. And so I look him up. I call up Gary, or I hit Gary up. And I tell him, I read his books. They're fantastic. I call up Gary and I say, hey, Gary, Would love to have you on my show. Yeah, I am. I told him, I said, I want to have you on my show. And I said, I did a 3-part series on the West Memphis 3. And he says, yeah, I know. I listened. Very good. That's what he says. And at this point, I'm like, oh my God, Gary Meese knows who I am. Gary Meese knows who I am. And it was cool. So he comes on after I do my 3-part, he comes on and we do 3 very popular podcasts. I don't like these either. I don't know why. They just got really popular. You look like you just got off of the boat. I did, actually. But they were really popular and they were highly controversial because some people feel so differently about that case. Then we got into just a bunch of different other stuff, and we became buddies, and I truly adore the man. Happy to work with him. In cam, it's funny because the first time that Gary and I ever recorded an episode, I drug my feet on releasing it. I hadn't edited it yet. And it was like 3 hours. It was like such a long, and I was, and I don't know exactly what happened. I remember I didn't save it or something like that. It was a very rookie mistake. And so man, it had been a month. I told him it would be up soon. And I told him it'd be up soon. And the best thing is I didn't have it anymore. Like I had lost it. I just lost it. It was gone. So I had to tell him. And I'm going, oh my God, I'm wasting this man's time. This man is a prominent author and he's got stuff to do. And I blew it. Thanks, Danny D. Appreciate it. But I remember I was like, I blew it. Yeah. And I had to tell him I didn't have it anymore. And he says, oh, that's a shame. We can do it again if need be. And I went, oh my God, are you kidding me? He's willing to do it again. And I remember thinking, you're such an idiot for missing the whole thing before. Like, how did you lose this? And he said, hey, let's do it again. So we do it again. It's even better that time. I release it almost immediately. And I can't believe. So after that, I learned a valuable lesson. I didn't want to waste this man's time. I felt so terrible, and he was so generous. And I saw some people in the chat say tonight that, oh, you're so patient. Yeah. Well, look, a lot of people have been patient with me. Look, if I was him and I had done that, by the way, we are great friends now. When I say great friends, like we're friends. We're friends. We're working on a project together, a documentary, but I thought I completely had blown it. with this guy that I respected and wanted to do some work with, and I was terrified to tell him that I had lost our episode, or that I didn't save it, or whatever. It was something. I can't even remember what happened to it, but I lost it. And it had, like I said, he had hit me up, like we did it. And a couple weeks went by and he says, "Hey, I was looking for that podcast. Have you put it up?" And I said, "No, I haven't yet." And he goes, "Oh, okay. No worries. I just checking." And no, I never did find it. Well, I never found it, but we redid it. But I said, "I'm going to put it up. I'm going to put it up." And I put up so anyway, we ended up doing 3 of them or more of them. I can't even remember how many we've done now. And we did the Amanda Knox ones. But I really thought that, like, this guy would never deal with me again, because how unprofessional. I go knocking on his door, begging him to come on my show for absolutely no money whatsoever. And then he goes out of his way. We spend 3 hours recording a podcast that never comes out because my whatever happened. And he says, "Whoa, well, we can do it again if you need." I went, "Oh my gosh. Yeah, I do. Can we do it tomorrow?" He says, "Yes." We did it. And after that, we just started working together. And he's the best, though. He's a good guy. Him and I got to have known each other. 2020 was interesting. I met a lot of cool people. I met 2020 sucked. 2021 was better. Do we know who this cool guy is? Yeah, I can show you. Hold on. Show you a picture of him. I'm sure he'll appreciate me doing this. I go, "Josh, why did you do that?" "Sorry, Gary. It's going to happen no matter what you say." "It's happening, Gary. Sorry. It's happening." Gonna loathe me. I'll eventually wear him down to a nub where he doesn't, like doing stuff like this to him. It's all right. He can take it. He's a big time author. Yeah, Luca. Should take some stuff serious. Just kidding. Bam bam ba da do do do. Yeah. So anyway,
The actual.
there is a part 2. Check this out, though. This is dope. I'll show you. So then you can see his wonderful face. Bam. Oh, this is not a new mic, but thank you. I have a bunch of mics. I know I don't use this one much, but I love it. Yeah, this and the SM7B, the other one that I have, this one right here. This one right. These are these 2. This is the Rev something Rev 40. I can't remember exactly the name. This one's the SM7B, and this one, they're the industry standard, I guess. But yeah, so I like both of them. I just like I have to clean. Like I clean the microphones. Like I have to, I air. Like I take them to an air compressor and clean them out. So that's what I was doing. I was cleaning those, and then I had this one, and I love this mic. I just never use it much, so I plugged it in. I'm impressed by a big mic. Okay, well, it's pretty normal size. I think the black one is my favorite. I didn't know that people were into the mics that I use. But the black one is my favorite. It's true. It is true. It's my favorite. But, and there's Gary right there, and there's Joshy right there. And that was our second pod that we did. I ran about 12 hours of your channel last night, and it's all the other mic. Yeah, that's true. I don't use this mic much at all. I used it more, and I use it more for audio only podcasts. It's more, this one's more of a radio mic. This one's more of a radio mic, but yeah, Gary's the man. He's good stuff. So smart. So smart. I'll have to introduce you guys. I'm sure some of you will listen to it, but I get involved in all these controversial cases because I like to tell people how I feel about them. Because some people don't like talking about them because disagreeing is not really a thing anymore. People, like, you can't have disagreements. It's you either agree with me or you're an idiot. I didn't know that it was a thing. I have other mics too. I have all kinds. Can you get different skins for your mic? I mean, I don't know. I never thought about it. Are you telling me that this mic doesn't sound that good? Is this what you're insinuating? It's okay. I do want to know. Let's see. It's sounds a lot more clear than the black one. More strong. Okay, I got what you're saying. Yeah, they did. Yeah. That's funny. It's just different. One's flatter. What you're talking about is one's more flat than the other. This one's not as flat as the SM7B. And the reason it's so flat is because you have to actually get a preamp to work it. It's all very boring stuff, but this one doesn't take a preamp, so you get a bit of more of a higher pitch. And the other one is much more dull and flat, which is what you want when you're doing live. You don't want to pick up a bunch of other sounds. So no, it's fine. I'm surprised. they are different looking mics. There's no question about it. And I sit in front of one. I like this mic. I like it. But I like my other one too. I always think, like, I think about my friends, and sometimes I'm like, I set mics up to see like how I can kind of adjust it to, boom. I like, things like cha ba ba ba, but anyway, and sometimes I do that and I fidget with these settings, and I wonder, like, I don't think anybody else does this stuff. I don't think anybody else does stuff like this. They're just weird. Like, I have mics on mics on mics, stands on stands on stands. What's the most comfortable? I'm always looking for something easier, better, something more convenient, something, whatever sounds the best is what I want. Which one is better for singing? The SM7B for sure. Yeah, like I said, this is a studio radio mic. Yeah, I'm not really sure what, like your boom. Thanks. I don't know. If you're talking about this, thank you. I like it too. That's funny. You guys are funny. After dark. That's why they call this After Dark. Nice boom, boom. Yeah. Yeah, I like it's the best. It's really nice. I used to have God, I could talk about this nerd stuff all day, but I used to have I gave my other one, or I don't know, I have a bunch of them, but I gave one that I used to use to Doug, and it's a really nice boom stand mic. But they came out with this new one called the Wave. And when you're, because if you could see what's in front of me right now, but because you can't, if you can see what's in front of me right at this very moment. So like right here, I have one screen camera. Danny D thinks that you've solved the JonBenet Ramsey case. I hope that's true. But if you can see what's in front of me right now, so if you have just like you have to be able to, because I have a keyboard here, I have a soundboard here, in front of me I have one screen, two screens, three screens, and another spare monitor right here. And so sometimes I have to be able to get to the control panels of this, of that one, and I got to move it out of the way. So this one, literally, the other one you have to like tighten and untighten, and but anyway, not sure why. It wasn't Burke. Well, yeah. Who was it? Anyway, I think that's enough. Thank you guys for watching, and have a good night. It's more flexible. That's the point of it. It does everything. It's the best. It's the best. Hey, thanks for coming, guys. It's awesome. It's fun. Little impromptu ones. I love it. Hi, Purple Knights. How are you? What? I'm not allowed to go. Holy shit, Josh, you look like my gnome.